Signore e signori, buonasera. Welcome to this multi-sensorial screening of Devoti Tutti, of Bernadette Wegenstein, that is here with us tonight. And I hope you enjoyed the welcome with the part of that celebration that is the Feast of Saint Agatha in Catania, that is the inspiration and the basis for this film. I'm just going to introduce to you my dear colleague and friend, Eugenio Refini, who is the chair of the Department of Italian Studies, and he will take over from here introducing his guests, saying something about the film and giving you an idea of the program of the evening. I just welcome you all here at the Casa once again, and please welcome Professor Eugenio Refini.
Thank you, Stefano. Thank you very much, Stefano. Thank you, Kaz, of course, for hosting us always for this fantastic event. It's such I feel so lucky to be working in this place because whenever we have ideas, we just run them through Stefano, and I would say almost always Stefano says yes, and we can really do beautiful things. And tonight we are really doing something special. I thought this morning when I was sort of preparing a few notes that I always say this sentence, but it's true because we always do something special here at Casa Italiana. So what we are doing tonight is that we will have a sort of two-fold event. We will begin with the screening of a film, Devoti Tutti, by Bernadette Wegenstein, and then we will have a panel discussion. We are very lucky to have Bernadette, the filmmaker and director of the film, with us tonight, and two other guests, Giulia Sbaffi and Bianco. I will introduce them briefly but more formally before the chat, because I really would like to get started with the screening. So this is a true gem, I would say, and really by one of the most lively and vibrant minds I've had the pleasure to work with over the years, Bernadette Wegenstein. She's a media studies professor, but also an author and filmmaker based at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. And tonight we are lucky to have her with us for a screening of this docu-fiction entitled Devoti Tutti, which has been presented earlier this year in festivals in Italy, such as the Bologna Biography Film Festival and the Ortigia Film Festival. This is actually the US premiere of the film. So yes, which will be then presented at festivals, I think later this in March, so in the spring of 2024. So we are really very lucky to have this preview here at Casa Italiana. So this is a project which has accompanied Bernadette for several years. We will hear more about that later. This is a very personal retelling of the martyrdom of Saint Agatha of Catania, the patron saint of Catania. This is something which is at the very same time very delicate and rather crude, real and surreal, a journey through the ways in which a story such as that of Agatha continues to inhabit the city, the daily life of the city of Catania, the rituals, but also, I think, a deeply moving reflection on the ways in which the voice of Agatha has been resonating in town. And some of you know that I'm very interested in voice-related matters, and so I really like to think about this particular film as a reflection on that as well. We have many voices in this film. The voice of Agatha, which is actually performed in the fiction of the film by Sicilian actress Donatella Finocchiaro. We hoped to have Donatella with us tonight, but this wasn't... Oh, thank you. Right, so we are sorry to miss her, but we will hear her voice. And this voice of Donatella's and Agatha resonates with other voices, including that of Bernadette herself, and I think that's a very beautiful thing in the movie, but also the visual voice, so to speak, of Agatha, because as you will see, we have animations in this movie as well by Adriana Copete, and you will see that those are extremely interesting, and they create some sort of dialogue with the other components of the film. So I don't want to say much now about Devoti Tutti because I think that the film should speak by itself, and we will then have a conversation between Bernadette, Giulia, and Laura. And as I said, I will introduce them later. So for now, I would just say enjoy the screening. Thank you for being here. And please, the three speakers. So in the in the interest of time, I will be brief with the introductions, but just to give a sense of we have three fantastic colleagues and friends. So Bernadette, the film director of Devoti Tutti. She's, as I said, she's a media studies professor in the Department of Modern Languages and Literatures at Johns Hopkins. She's also the director of the Center for Advanced Media Studies there. She's the author of several books. I won't go through the titles just to save time. I just would like to mention, though, that she's the director and author of several films. I think this is the fifth, right? And all of them touching on different topics of great importance, and all of them very different one from the other, but all inspired to my mind by this very strong sense of combining reality, even in a very crude sense, as you have seen, but also this very poetical way of telling stories. And this storytelling feature is something which I would like to go back in the discussion. And so the titles, The Good Breast, which I guess has some sort of connection, of course, with Saint Agatha. It was a documentary on breast cancer. Then See You Soon Again, a film about Holocaust survivors in the Baltimore area. And most recently, the award-winning The Conductor, revolving around the trailblazing career of conductor Marin Alsop, and her current project, and we will hopefully have another screening sometime soon, is a very interesting project on Holocaust archives and the way in which memories get to be erased and the past gets to be erased or potentially recovered through the study of archival materials. So this is just a very, very short overview of the many things that Bernadette does, both as a scholar and as a film director. So our discussants, together with Bernadette tonight, are Giulia Sbaffi and Laura Di Bianco. So Giulia is a college core curriculum postdoctoral teaching fellow here at NYU, and she received her PhD in Italian studies from our program, so we are very happy to have her here with us in a different role. Giulia's research incorporates 20th century Western European culture, literature, and film with questions ranging from gender and sexuality to oral history and urban studies. She has published on journals such as The Italianist, Modern Italy, and others, and her dissertation, which she defended successfully, very successfully, last spring, A spunciare le pulle, The Politicization of Sex Work in Italy, 1982-1986, investigates the forms of political organizing adopted by sex workers in Italy in the 1980s, and is a very interesting project, not only because of the topic, but also because of the methodology, in the sense that Giulia has been working with all sorts of materials, including interviews with sex workers, including a community of sex workers in Catania, so that will be our connection, but also more, let's say, traditional material archives, even if I would argue that no archive is traditional in a way, because every single archive raises so many different questions in terms of materiality and the kind of work they do, but in materials including archives in Cambridge, Massachusetts, Geneva, London, Paris, and Rome, so a very broad project. Laura Di Bianco is an assistant professor of Italian studies in the Department of Modern Languages and Literatures at Johns Hopkins University, where she's also affiliated faculty with the Center for Advanced Media Studies, the program for the study of women, gender, and sexuality, and the Environmental Science and Studies program. So Laura works at the intersections of cinema, literature, and culture with these two primary interests, among other things, particularly women and gender studies and environmental studies. And her recent publications, and I will just mention a couple of them, one out and the other in the making. It's a very beautiful book entitled Wandering Women, Urban Ecologies of Italian Feminist Filmmaking, which came out earlier this year with Indiana University Press, which explores the work of contemporary Italian women directors from feminist and ecological perspectives. And this is a line of inquiry that she's developing further in her current book project entitled Crumbling beauty. I mean, I do know a lot about this project, and there's really much to wait for, so I can't wait to see it achieved. And she's the recipient of numerous fellowships, including the Lauro De Bosis Fellowship at Harvard and the Bogliasco Fellowship in the Humanities. So these are very brief introductions, but I really would like to move on to the discussion of the film. So maybe we could just begin by brainstorming a bit. I have plenty of things to ask, but I would like to leave the floor to you guys. So
thank you. Thank you for this lovely introduction, Eugenio, and for having us all from Baltimore here. It's been thrilling, and for me, a real joy to see this film in its beautiful final cut. I've been following the production of Devoti Tutti since I joined Johns Hopkins University, and I met Bernadette. And for me, having at the center of my research on women's cinema, the way women say I in their films, the way women inscribe themselves into the cinematic text has been so fascinating to see it happening in this film and seeing it becoming more and more personal and less the story of a festa or the cult of a saint, and more the story of just a girl whose body has been destroyed, dismembered, and more the story of all women victims of violence. And again, I'm really fascinated by the way you enter the scene in such a delicate way. And although we see you only twice in the frame, you're always present in the way you whisper, in the way you answer or comment on the people's thoughts. And so I wanted to ask you about this, and I wanted to hear your thoughts about this film allowed you to be to say I, as opposed to previous projects like the Good Breast or The Conductor.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Eugenio, for having me. This is so special for me to have this very intimate screening. So many of you I know, and you came from Baltimore to see it here. It really means a lot to me, and also to have Eugenio, our ex-colleague at Hopkins, and to bring in Giulia and all of you. So I'm really very, very happy, and this is so much better than, you know, a big festival premiere, which we will have with like a public that maybe doesn't know much about this cult. And so it's a very different screening, because I can tell that so many of you, all of you, really understand this film, because you have some experience perhaps in Italy. And you maybe have had breast cakes to eat already before this film. So in terms of the personal connection, yes, it's true that I think I have a personal connection to all of my films, and I always work very hard until I find a very strong connection with the main character, as it was with Maren Alsop in The Conductor, or at the moment I'm making this film about the archives, and I have many characters, so it's a different process, but it's still always about finding me in them. I think that's the first answer I can give. And here, in this case, of course, you know, I'm neither from Catania, nor am I a saint. But I do, you know, I am a woman, and I think that I related to these themes also on a very personal level. And I tried to find a vehicle or a person that I could really connect to, and that was Angela. And it took me a while to really find her, because, you know, it takes a while to get the trust from somebody like Angela. And I was talking about this earlier. Of course, it's a completely different level of encounter, because here I'm an international filmmaker, and she's a woman who's never left Catania. And one of the beautiful things that I just shared with some of you earlier is that we're showing this film in Vienna at a human rights film festival, and Angela is invited, and she said it's the first time she's leaving Sicily, and she's excited to you know, to go on this trip by herself, which is, you know, which has never happened. So this to me is sort of really the ultimate meaning, and it's not about the impact film that, you know, a lot of you know, like an activism that is very I would say openly political. My films are I do like the impact, but for me, it's always about the emotional impact. You know, I have to have this emotional connection, and I want the audience to have an emotional connection in the moment of certain scenes. And then sometimes I really like to go to the very dark truth of things. But that's why then we have Madre Giovanna and Lulu, Transagata, and others who just pull us up and out of this. I do like to go into these places, but I don't like to stay there very long. And that's why, you know, the film has this kind of dramaturgy, and really all of my films in a way have that, even though they have a very different theme. And that's perhaps, you know, the Viennese in me, you know. I mean, I just think it's why I use the Schubert Andantino, because it's a very sad piece, but we changed it a little bit. And you can do a lot with this sadness, and you can actually also find joy in it.
Well, thank you, Eugenio, for having me here tonight. It's a great pleasure to be back and to be able to discuss such an important movie. Important on many levels. I think it's important for me because it's rare to find work that can tell Catania and then can tell the complexity of that society. But also I think it's important because, and I wanted to thank you for that, it's really, I don't know, it gives me joy, but also it gives me hope and solace in seeing that there is an happy ending. The fact that at the end, she flies over Catania and she's free, and the importance of the release of tension that comes with the happy ending, you know? Because at the end of the day, this is a story about the feminicides, and to this day, today, we count 34 feminicides in Italy, 12 only in Sicily. And so the importance of not only giving like a happy ending that gives hope, but incorporating humor, which is where I want to bring my question. So if you can tell us, because we laugh a lot, and we can easily move into laughing and without feeling uncomfortable, and laughing in a moment after, empathizing with those characters. So if you can tell us a little bit how you managed to incorporate so much humor in that.
Thank you so much. And it really means a lot because you lived in Catania, and I mean, I had one Sicily screening, and it went really well. We got the audience award, but I'm bringing the film to actually Catania in a few months, and I'm a little nervous. Okay, I'm glad. Well, I mean, your question about the humor, and I think Laura asked me this question too. I mean, I think humor is extremely important, especially when you go to, as I said earlier, dark places and difficult truths. And I think that, you know, in a very simple way, one can say, you know, that the humor camouflages and covers up the sadness, and I think humor and what's the other word? For some reason, I'm thinking in German now, Trauer, which is how do you say? Yeah, Trauer, but it's like when you are in lutto. Mourning. Yes, exactly. Sorry. Yeah, no, Freude, like Trauerarbeit, the work of this morning. Yeah, I mean, but I think that comedy and mourning, you know, I mean, those are extreme emotions, and they're very difficult to locate because they're not clear, they're ambiguous, and they'll work very differently for all of us. And they're culturally determined. So I don't know, I'm fascinated with these emotions. Just to give you an example, I think, you know, I return to the theme of the Holocaust because I'm, you know, this is a personal theme for me too. But when I was young, I watched La Vita è Bella with my mother. And, you know, we have a great-grandmother who was killed in front of my mother's eyes. So these are very difficult topics for us. But I loved that film, and I never saw my mother laugh so hard as in this film. And it was so, it releases you because there's a big tension around a topic like this. And we went to see this film, and it totally liberated my mother. And she told me a lot of stories afterward about, you know, the Nazi era. And so I think that some of art, not just film, you know, can really open up areas that you can otherwise not easily navigate because you would have to have a very safe environment or a therapeutic even, I think, environment. And I think what interests me here is we're talking, yes, about dismemberment, and we're talking about feminicide, because even though St. Peter apparently, you know, in one mythological stratum of the story, you know, offered to heal her, she said, no, I don't need to be healed. and so she lived on, even though it's probably impossible to actually survive a breast amputation. So we are talking about these things, and I think that the populace, this chorus that you were talking about, Eugenio, is also really helping us in their simplicity and in their maybe sometimes silly sounding versions of it, but I actually didn't laugh about those versions. I love those versions that they all have, because these are all ways to explain the impossible. And I think comedy and tragedy is exactly that. It's a place where the impossible can be explained, or not even explained, but shown or demonstrated and felt. And by no means am I where I would like to go with this. I mean, I'm making a documentary, but I'm also working on a narrative feature called A Sweet Secret, and it's a comedy that takes place in the 1920s, pre-Holocaust. So I think I'm very drawn always to this place of the impossible, where these discourse regimes meet.
Can I ask a follow-up question on the playful tone of the film? How did you come up with the idea of the flying Minna?
The flying breast. Honestly, I thought I saw this flying breast very early on in my mind, and I have a very sort of crazy fantasy. But I think I think when I saw the plate and some of these representations. One is by and you're all not all, but I know some of you are specialists of there's a very famous painting. It doesn't matter right now, but there are so many famous paintings of Agatha with her breastplate, right? And so when I saw that plate, for me it was just a very simple thing. I thought, what if they moved, What if they... And then the flying, I have to say, I worked with Adriana Copetti, who's the animator, and her team, they're all Colombian animators, and it worked really well because there was sort of a magic realism that was in the style of these animators, but then they weren't really Italian, so they were also feeling very free to let the breasts fly, and they weren't really connected personally to this material, and I wanted that not to be an obstacle, and the form and those wings. We really studied, some artworks, and so we had some, really a long time to really find the shape for the breast, because I didn't want it to be sexual at all, and that's difficult because in our culture, it's hard to see a breast not in a sexual way. But I hope I wanted it to be playful, because I do think that that's what violence does. I think. Nothing goes away, you can dismember people, but I think that that the violence per se, for me, those breasts are the memory of this violence, and the fact that they are nice to look at or funny to look at is important again for this comedy reason, so that we can actually deal with it.
I love that they have a point of view.
Yes, and there is the breast point of view.
Speaking of which, actually, can I ask something? I think that the question of the point of view in this film is really crucial, because something which I've appreciated, and I remember that coming up already in one of the earliest cuts, is the fact that you have all these, as we said, voices, right? In the sense that we have the main character, if you will, is Agatha, undoubtedly, who's also a non-character in a way, but then we do slowly get into her through the perceptions of the others, right? And we have all sorts of people from Catania, very different in kind, with different approaches, and yet at some point we get in this kind of polyphonic sort of description of the figure of Agatha and what she means to all of them. And interestingly enough, she does mean something to each of them, right? Yes. Including, the doctor, for instance, who, she might come up as the most enlightened kind of character in the film. She's a, sort of energetic woman. She's very emancipata, as we would say in Italian, and someone who's been fighting for, kind of getting the situation of women better in town. But then, and of course, she's not indifferent, right, to Agatha. Agatha. So there's an enlightened, so to speak, way to relate to the cult, and then we have all the other versions. And so the kind of thing which I wanted to ask you is, how did you manage to create some sort of consistency with all these different points of view?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because that was really the hardest part. I always knew I wanted to bring out this polyphony and semantics, because, as you say, all of these versions of Agatha, for the fishermen, for the nuns, for the priests, and for, you know, Angela, and for women who have actually endured violence, are very different. And I think what I liked about it, first of all, is that a myth is exactly that. It's a story that has a different meaning to all of the people who are telling it. Yeah? And so it was clear to me that I wanted to include them all. But then how to make that work, and I think earlier we talked about editing and storytelling, how to make it work so that it actually is a story that other people can follow too. And it took a while. And I had 2 editors. So the first one was Eduardo. He's Sicilian, and he's a very accomplished filmmaker himself and editor, pretty famous editor in Italy. And so he loved the story because he's also from Catania, and he made a film about San Birillo, which is the quartiere that you were working on. And so he said, he immediately helped me with one very, very big thing. He said, you have to separate the story of what happened to her from the miracles. So that's why the miracles have their own little area. Because I had at first thought, you know, okay, so she's being tortured and killed and amputated and whatnot, but she also has to perform all these miracles. And I think it is very symptomatic of how, you know, of what patriarchy does with this kind of a female protagonist, that they burden with not only being the victim of their crimes, but also then resolving their own guilt and their own society. But then he said to me, yes, but this is too complex. This is film, so we have to separate it. We can't say it in the same breath. So then we had the folklore, which is the whole, you know, processione and that. And I also had that interwoven at first, and you probably saw this still. And he also said, he said this really great sentence. He said, you know, the folklore non porta avanti la storia, because it's always the same thing. So he said, look, we can put these people with the candelori here or there in the film. It doesn't make any difference, because they don't actually push the story forward. And that's, of course, what an editor has to make sure, is that you don't go backward and you need to push it forward. So he helped me reduce those scenes. And by that also the vocalism of the populace became stronger. So it was really, and then I had an Austrian editor come in who edited with me other films that I had finished, The Conductor and so forth. And his point of view was really important too, because he's not Italian and not particularly Catholic or anything, and so he was able to really ask very, you know, put some things back that we had already taken out just for clarification. And also all the music editing with the Schubert, you know, I did with Stefan, and so that was another division. But I think it's not as easy now as it's, you know, when you see it intercut like this. This was hard to make it work, I would actually really admit.
It's so interesting to hear you telling us that, because my impression is that, of course, the work of the editors help a lot facilitating the reading of Catania, which I said before. Like, it's one thing to see Palermo and Laura Esa Fegatello on Le Sorelle Macaluso, and so the representation of Palermo, and then that is something that we are definitely more familiar with. But Catania, it's an unknown territory because it's way more complex. And so in a way, this work of editing makes it very easy for us to read Catania and all its complexity. On the other end, it's interesting that you separated those things because we're too complicated. But what it happens is that it creates, to me as a viewers, 2 different readings of the story. First, okay, I know how Catania works, and then I see those men, and their presence is suffocating, and you show that, like they're all together outside in the public. And then for the women, instead, this story inside, in their household, in the room of the hospital, helps them processing trauma. Yeah. collectivized in some instances, then can use, and then we have those beautiful, again, happy ending that gives us some hope of the processing that will continue, because there is a lot of repeating of afterwards, what happened afterwards. So time is moving. Folklore might keep something steady, the representation of the Santa and how men and population in general perceive it. But on the other hand, it's pushing something forward. Yeah. So going back to what you were saying before about Angela, I want to ask you, with this idea of processing and moving forward, what did they say when they saw the movie?
Okay, so Angela saw the movie Nortigia for the first time because she wasn't able to come to Bologna, but her daughter Cristina came. So she flew to Bologna. They loved the film. Angela was crying the entire time, and she also filmed on her phone the entire film. I said, Angela, please don't put it on. And she said no, but she just did it for herself, because we were all there, all the editors and everybody, and Stefan and Eduardo were like, oh, you should probably tell Angela not to film during the proiezione. And I said, no, I mean, I asked her, I said, Angela, why are you filming? And she said, I just want to watch it every night. She loves the film, and she's coming to Vienna now. She says that, it's interesting, all my characters usually love themselves in the films that I've made, and it's important to me. So I've had one character here who is still okay with it, but some things that he says he's not so happy about, because it's the power discourse about the uomini di potere, and so that weighs on me, because I think in my filmmaking anyway, I want to go with the point of view of any character, and I don't think it's ethical to do it any other way. So Angela, Cristina, those people really love the film, and I showed it to Mimmo, some of the fishermen, and I think they have a very, they look. It's like when you see yourself in a film, everybody has a very different feeling about themselves. But I wanted to say one other thing about this storytelling, because I have to say what really changed is when the animations were finally done, and what they actually did to the fabric of the story. They were, it was not easy to cut them in, and they changed everything, because they changed, especially when Agatha is present during the men scenes, it has a completely different meaning, and it's very conflictual, as you say, and very ambivalent and difficult to see the procession and to hear her breathe, and that really changed the film and affected our storytelling again. And so it was really difficult, and we went back all the time to make that work, because in a way, now it's a fictional film and it has very different demands. For instance, you have to start and end with your main character, and so this is Agatha, and it is very personal, as you said, and I want to share with you that the person who is playing Agatha, because for rotoscoping, so let me go back. Adriana first presented me with a drawing that went with the aesthetic of the breast, and it looked like a Disney film, then, because if you have I said, no, I can't have a Disney character with blonde long hair sitting around in this cell. And then she said, okay, Berna, what do you really want? And so we really workshopped it, and at a certain point she called me. She's like, I know what you need. We need to rotoscope, because you want to have control over all her actions, but then you need a real person to act out Agatha. And you need somebody, so a young woman, and she suggested, how about Charlotte, your daughter? Yes, and that's who is in the film, who's playing Agatha.
Right, thank you, Bernadette. I think I'm mindful of time, so I thought maybe if there are a couple of questions from the audience, that's the right moment to go for them. Yes, I see a few hands. Yes.
No, you keep that.
My family is from Catania, but not from Catania, from Santa Maria de Ligudia in Bianco. And I spoke Sicilian as a child. I never heard anything about Saint Agatha. My aunt, one of my aunts was named Saint Agatha, but when they came here, they converted to Protestant. And one of my aunts was a missionary in China during the Second World War, prison of the Japanese, and then became a minister and lived in Italy and converted Italians. Wow. So
Wow, what an Agatha.
Agatha.
That's what Agathas
was
do.
More of played guitar, and she was always designing clothes. She was completely not like Saint
I love
Agatha,
it.
but I never heard any of their paesani catanese ever talk about Saint Agatha. I never knew anything.
You know, it's true that Saint Agatha is relatively unknown. I mean, she's very known to Italians, but outside of Italy, you know, this being, I think, the third largest Catholic procession in the world. I think it's after Semana Santa in Mexico and some other. You know, it's really surprising, actually, how little known she is.
Never heard about her. Great. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. I was wondering if you could talk about your process in imagining Agatha and how you brought her to life and felt kind of the license to bring this mythological figure, and maybe some other works that you drew on for inspiration, other books or...
Yeah. That's a really great question. I think that this license is exactly why this film took me so many years to feel comfortable making and writing. And I worked mostly with Judith Herman's trauma and recovery, and with her, you know, phases of post-traumatic stress disorder, post-violence. And so I really very carefully structured every word that Agatha says and what she does according to actually, you know, this psychoanalytic study of this condition that violence causes people, and is particularly sexual violence causes women. And I have done a lot of work on this topic, both personally and through literature. How I came then to sort of to know exactly, I have to say it was, again, a long process, because I'm unfortunately also a little inexperienced fictional director. So I had to see, and so I asked my daughter to do a lot of things, you know. And then when I saw it, I knew if this was the right thing or not. And it's hard to tell, but that's something where it's an entirely creative impulse. I see it and I know this is right. It's like when you hang up a picture and you know this is where you want it. And so for me, I'm always a very obsessive compulsive about these kinds of things until they fit exactly the way that I thought they were right. The fact that she puts her cell in order is something that I think everybody can really relate to, even hopefully not because of having experienced violence. But I think putting your place in order is a way that you can control your environment. Because if you can't control your body, then there's something little that you can control, to just put something in place. So I really studied all of these gestures and these things very exactly. And it's not a coincidence why they're there where they are.
So I wanted to hear your opinion on, 'cause one thing that really struck me is how delicately this violence against women is portrayed, but not only women, the violence against the women, but also the class violence. So you can really see the class struggle in a society that seems very poor. I have never been to Sicily. I have been to Italy, but to the north part, which is a completely different dynamic, I guess. But you can really feel this, and you can feel the clash between the poor people that just want to see the saint and the powers of the church and everyone in between. And I was thinking, at some point it's like very emotional because you can feel that this figure gives them hope and helps them move forward with their lives, but in the same time, isn't this also kind of stopping the struggle to evolve? And isn't it kind of like in the way of the fight for their rights, because they like kind of settle with this, okay, yeah, the saint protects us and that's all we need?
Yeah.
What do you think of that?
I think this is brilliant. You actually, I completely agree with your reading, and I'm so happy you felt that way, never having been there. I think that's sort of jumping from the fictionalization to the documentary parts in this film. That was exactly the purpose, to show this reality and how this reality maintains and needs the myth, because it actually lives within the myth, but through this, if she doesn't really leave them behind, they'll never ask the question, what can we actually do? And so, for instance, just to answer you, in Bologna, where we had the premiere at Biografilm, there were so many people and they all asked the same question. What are they going to do without her now? How are they going to overcome the violence, either as victims or as perpetrators? Like, you can't take that out of her, of that place, because it's going to go crazy. And I said, yeah, but that's not my or Agatha's responsibility. I mean, I can do anything, as I can imagine flying breasts or whatever, Nobody can stop me. So it really shows you that this is a system that sort of self-feeds itself explanations and excuses, and I hope I'm not stepping on anybody's toes, but I think Catholicism also has a little bit of a problem of, has many problems, but I think I think one of the problems is this justification of the violence and the aestheticization, because of course they are also living in this narrative also visually, and you see this all the time. And you see a beautiful aesthetic picture of a woman who is tortured to death and dismembered, and you perceive her as sempre più simpatica and sempre più bella. And it's not his fault that he sees her that way, but that's the way that this myth contains, and I would say imprisons, not only women, but also the men who live in it. And then the other question about the intersectionality between poverty, and I think that's something that is absolutely the case. It's a very poor city, and with a lot of criminal problems. And I think they really need the myth of Agatha to survive, and I didn't want to take it away from them, but we'll see what happens when I show it in Catania. But I wanted to just sort of play this thought game of, what if she were to have her own life, how would that feel?
I think we have time for one final question.
I think there's one. Or maybe Jonas. Can we also have Jonas? A quick one.
I was very curious about the subtitling, the use of the word booby for breast. Can you elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, because so the minne is sort of a diminutive in Sicilian for breast, because she says, I miei seni, le mie minne. And boobies, I thought, I had a whole team of young women who helped me translate into English, who are native speakers, and one of them is here. And it's very difficult in the English language to not think of the breasts as something sexual. And so we wanted it to be more playful, more childlike. But it's true that there is probably really no translation for minne, unfortunately. So you're right to point that out. Okay. Maybe can we just have Jonas ask the very last question? Thank you.
First, thanks so much, Berna, for sharing this film with us. I'll try to be really quick, but I really, really love how you're able to both, and you've all talked about this in the way that it is able to be polyvocal, and like you're both going with and alongside people who have religious beliefs and yet still very critical of them. And I feel like you accomplish this through a lot of these sometimes small and sometimes large sweeping juxtapositions. And the sequence that stuck with me like really powerfully was like you go from this sequence where what we presume is a sex worker delivers this line like all women are saints, and then we go to a celibate priest saying, if the motive for this martyrdom was passion, obviously you would remove the breasts. And it's like there's so many of these little moments and then big moments where it's like the temporal juxtapositions. Are there any others that you could
Absolutely. I mean, I think you just sort of pointed out the essence of of the storytelling device for this film, and I want to say that all my films, I love juxtaposition, and again, I love going there, but not looking too long because you might get depressed, or you might just go to the other side. So I think we need to go there, but then somewhere else. It's just what you do also when you see something really scary, you protect yourself often. And, I think that I'm trying to find this principle not just because it's my pleasure principle, because I also think it does justice to the way that she and her story live in Catania, because it goes really from eating the breast cake in the morning to dedicating your daughter's feminist side to her. I mean, both of these coexist, and I think why I love film as a medium is because you can really condense these juxtapositions so they really take you out of your chair, and you can do this in 1 hour. And in real life, things take much longer to juxtapose, but that's sort of, I think, what really helps the story again moving forward, or also going into its essence, because there's this essence that you pointed out of the love for her and yet the cruelty of the story, and those both coexist. And to say the very last thing, I think it's Mozart, who said it, but I think that what's so nice about art or translating something, a material into another medium, is because you can actually use all of the emotions. You don't need to decide that, this is sad or this is, thumbs up or thumbs down. No, this is not how it works. There's all of it. There's place for all of it. And so many, I think, great artworks really are inspired by the idea of expressing all of these emotions at the same time. And I don't see why we wouldn't do it.
Right. Well.